Well, I'm Pastor Lang. It's good to meet you. And I think I've seen some of your faces, of course, here at either camp at one time or another. But I'm from about an hour away, just north of town. So I'm in White House, Tennessee. I have 8 children. And so this is always exciting at our house, and lots of noise and lots of rambunctiousness. And we love the Bill Rice Ranch, and I appreciate the ranch allowing me to come in. We have a small church, about 130. And we have about, we had 29 teens this past week, so quite a large teen group. And with that said, our youth group, we don't have a youth pastor. Our youth ministry is called the Bill Rice Ranch. Every time there's an event at the ranch, we're here. You say, well, it sounds pretty simple. Well, it is, but the ranch supports where our church is headed. We're headed the same direction. So that's been a great blessing to me, and kind of how we've just kind of run with our young people. And so I guess we'll get to know each other over the next several days. I'm thrilled that you're here. I consider this group of young people that I've seen for the past several years at the ranch to be some of the most attentive, as well as some of the young people that I really believe God's going to use in a great, great way. So I'm expecting God to use you tremendously, and I believe you probably have a very tender heart if you're in this place. So I expect that. And I want to be helpful today. Let's go ahead and go through our course syllabus. Our course syllabus, everyone should have a copy. There's my name at the top, just Pastor Joseph Lang. The course is Character Studies in Proverbs. And as a course description, this course gives an overview of the book of Proverbs and identifies the major characters of the Bible's wisdom literature, including the following: the wise, the foolish, and the simple. Most of the characters we're going to look at are in contrast. So you've got the wise and the foolish would be a contrast. The diligent and the slothful would be another contrast. And I always enjoy that day of class, going over those two. Then we have the waster, which kind of goes with the slothful. And then you have the prudent, the angry, the scorner, and we'll close out the week with the strange woman and the virtuous woman. So each character is examined in light of his appearance in the book of Proverbs. The purpose of the course is to be able to identify and help people in the sphere of ministry that God has called us to serve. Now, how many of you believe that God has called you into ministry? Me saying, I don't know exactly, but if God would call me to ministry, that's where I would like to go in some form. Would you slip a hand up in the air? God may be calling you to some form of ministry. Would you keep your hand up just for a minute so I can count? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, very good. Very good. Well, just to give you an idea here of what we're looking at in the class, the purpose is, first bullet, to increase in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and man as the Lord Jesus did. God's wisdom helps us to honestly evaluate our own personal character, our personal character flaws, so that we can be conformed to the image of God. And also, I believe this course will be a help to pastors and pastors' wives to be able to read people and to counsel them in wisdom. If you know who you're looking at, you're better able to counsel them. It really does help. You know, I can walk into a room, or I can have people walk into my office, and I've never met them before, and they want counsel in a matter. But there are some ways, it doesn't matter if I've ever met them before or not, I know a lot about them. Because, as in water, face answereth to face. I know about myself and my flaws. And there's no temptation taken us but such as is what? Common to man. So the same things that I face, they probably face. And as in water, face answers to face. So this course is designed to help pastors read people. It's also to help challenge teachers. Now, every one of you is a teacher. You may not feel like a teacher or see yourself as a teacher, but you're all called to be teachers, even if it's teachers of your own children someday. I want to challenge teachers to instruct the simple, warn the foolish, encourage the wise and diligent, and slow down the angry person. Remember, slow to wrath? Also to isolate the scorner. To enable parents to identify character flaws and root those out of your children early. Pastor Lang, did you forget where you are? We don't have children. Okay, I'm presuming that someday you will. Some things in this course are going to be aimed at that. So put yourself years down the road, how can I use this? I don't know what kind of a note taker you are. I know when I was in school, there were note takers who sat back and they took them like this. And they absorbed it. But I took notes on everything. If the teacher sneezed, I wrote it down. So much so that I had better notes than most everybody else in the class. Sometimes they'd come to me to get them. I would fill out pages and pages and pages of notes. And I challenge you, don't forget, the weakest pencil lasts longer than the smartest mind. So write down things from all your teachers. I'm not just saying Pastor Lang, Dr. Molinex, Dr. Shepler, write it all down. You will forget if you don't. Course requirements. Okay, this is important. Your assignments for the week, you both have reading assignments and writing assignments, but they're not very hard. Mondays, today's assignment, this is due tomorrow, is to read Proverbs 1 through 3. Proverbs 1 through 3, that's tonight. And I want you to list 3 of the major characters found in Proverbs 1. Also, finish the simple word study handout you'll receive today. Tuesdays, and it's a very short assignment, it's just 5 verses to read, and then list 3 ways the slothful can be identified in the text, and 3 applications to identifying him today. Wednesday, you see the verses to read, and then write a brief explanation of each of those 3 verses in your own words. You say, how long should it be? Long enough that you think it's something that you can use. I'm not interested in a page long or half a page long. It's kind of like, I think Brother Will says about Bible reading. He says, read better, not more. Read better, not more. So write better, not more. And I'll leave it on your conscience. I know some of you just, that assignment just dwindled down to about 6 words on the page. Okay, so next, this is by Thursday, read chapters 1 through 9 and list 25 topics that the writer, which is a father, taught his son. Okay, on the back side of your course syllabus, there's a suggested bibliography. I put an asterisk next to those books, which I found especially helpful. I should have put an asterisk next to the first one. This is the best book I've ever found on Proverbs yet, and it's one that I just got a hold of this past year, Dan Reed. So I would encourage you to get that. I purchased a copy for every family in our church, and they're going to be getting that for Father's Day or Mother's Day. So it'll be one copy for their family. There's a few other books here. I'll try to bring copies in tomorrow or Wednesday. Jay Adams' book. He's a Calvinist, so you want to be aware of that. But most of his materials are confrontational when it comes to sin, and I appreciate that. It's dealing with people. He'll give you lists of things when you're in counseling, and someone says, I can't. And he'll just say, he'll just list things down like this: can't or you won't. I can't. Well, doesn't the Bible say, I can do all things through Christ which strengtheneth me? He has lists and lists and books that are helpful. Just be careful of his Calvinism. John Kitchen has a good book on Proverbs. Derek Kidner is one of the better books that I really like on Proverbs, because for every verse in Proverbs, he gives you a 6-word or less summary. It's hard to be concise. So Kidner gives you a 6-word summary and then gives you a paragraph of explanation on that verse. So George Lawson, his commentary is okay. Bruce Lackey's is pretty good. Commentaries on wisdom literature, there's a couple there. And on counseling, the one I want to mention is How to Read a Person Like a Book. Probably one of the better books that ever helped me in ministry was How to Read a Person Like a Book. It was given to us by the pastor who trained me and the other interns. It's a small book, 100 pages or so, and it's mostly pictures. That's nice. And it's big print. But the point of the book is, and I think it's this, every one of you ought to get a hold of the book and read it. It's not Christian. It's not intended for Christians. But the whole point is you can read people. And it teaches gestures, or it would be nonverbal communication. So what do you think of someone when they are talking to you and you ask them a question? Did you take that? And they won't look at you. And then they, no. Do you have the feeling that maybe you were just lied to? Well, this book gives you 10, 15 different things people normally do when they lie. Now, one of them is they won't look at you. One of them is sometimes they'll cover their mouth. Now, if someone sneezes, they covered their mouth, but they probably weren't lying. The whole point is gesture clusters. When you have 5 to 8 of these things happening, they may not have lied, but there's a pretty good chance they're lying to you. The same thing, it talks about flirting. Gestures people do when they're flirting, gestures people do when they're angry, gestures people do when they're closed. You know, they're talking to you, and suddenly they get stiff, and then they're closed. Jaw tightens, you've lost them. Even in a classroom like this, you all have nonverbal communication right now. But when you're dealing with people, it's really helpful to know if someone's open, if they're leaning forward, if they're listening in their intent. And so by the end of the book, it shows you a picture of a jury and all these people in the jury. And it tells you which one would the lawyer not want on the jury if he's trying to persuade them, which one is the strongest person in the room. So if you were to pick your jury and you definitely don't want that person influencing your court case, which would you not want in the room? So this is an extremely helpful book. This is what the whole study is about this week, reading people and understanding how to help with character. Okay, that is our course syllabus. Let's go ahead and pass out now our introduction to the book of Proverbs. This is going to be a little more difficult to hand out because I have 7 pages for you and I do not have them stapled. Could I divide these up between a couple of young men? And what's your name, if you don't mind me asking? What is it? Matt. Okay, and then Everett, if I can get your help. So I'm going to have you take the front row and you take the back row. I think there's 7 pages. You'll have to count them out and get those to him. Okay, this is going to be our introduction to the book of Proverbs. And much of this I gleaned from one of the books I just mentioned, from John Kitchen's Proverbs commentary. So this is going to be coming down the row. Any questions about the course syllabus, about your homework assignments so far? Any questions? All right. Either it was very well explained or you're asleep.
Well explained.
Okay. All right. Okay, he'll be coming around the row to you and getting that in your hand. So anytime you have a question during the class, you're welcome just to raise your hand and we'll ask it. That doesn't mean I'll have the answer, but I think so. So, okay, and front and back. Front and back. Yes. Okay, let's go ahead and we're just going to walk right through this. This will be the only handout you're going to receive this week other than the course syllabus that I'm going to give it to you just word for word. So you can read along with me, and I'm not trying to insult your intelligence, but what that means is when it's word for word that many of the test questions are going to come off this. So if you're listening carefully and you're highlighting or writing along with it, and if I emphasize it, you might want to take note. Okay, let's go through this. The introduction to the book of Proverbs. Wisdom in the ancient world. Wisdom was highly sought after by the Egyptians, and I've given you 3 separate references where the Egyptians sought out wisdom. By the Babylonians, by the Edomites, and by Solomon. Remember Solomon, this whole book starts out by saying the Proverbs of Solomon, the son of David, the king of Israel. The Bible is immediately establishing the authority of the book. Do you understand that every culture had Proverbs? We have Proverbs. A stitch in time saves 9, right? You've got every thief thinks everyone steals. Every culture has Proverbs. But these Proverbs are God's divinely inspired word. So when you approach this book, you have the wisdom of heaven. Now, it starts out by saying the Proverbs of Solomon. Remember, Solomon is the one that God gave him his choice, and he asked for wisdom. Lord, I don't know how to go out or how to come in. How am I going to guide this, thy so great a people? And he asks for wisdom, doesn't he? And so we have this book of Proverbs largely from Solomon. There are some others. You'll see in a moment. Proverbial wisdom in the Bible, number 2. What is a proverb? Well, the Hebrew word for proverb, mashal, means to be like. To be like. A proverb holds one thing next to another to observe likenesses, differences, and comparisons. Jesus' teaching in parables is similar. He regularly said, the kingdom of heaven is like unto. Like unto. So the Hebrew word for proverb can be used to speak of, and it's a very broad word, a byword, Deuteronomy 28, a taunt, a lengthy discourse, a parable, an allegory, a lamentation, or a riddle. The English word proverb means brevity. Brevity. Our English word proverb, proverb, means 4 words. F-O-R, 4 words. Verb as in verbose, wordy. You ever met someone who was verbose? Didn't know when to stop? Well, this means taking the place of many words. A proverb is a compressed truth. Many more words could have been used to express the same truth, but a proverb makes the point succinctly, poetically, and powerfully. A proverb is a stubby sentence, pregnant with meaning. A college in a cup. Now, within the book of Proverbs, there is instruction, there's personification, there's numerical sayings. I remember when I first got hold of this next thought, I thought, this is helpful. You see that in the book of Proverbs, there are wordings that say 3, yea, 4. You remember these? 3, yea, 4. Well, that relates 2 concepts. Number 1, here is a very specific list, but it's not exhaustive. 3, yea, 4. This is a specific list, but it's not exhaustive. And the second, here's a list with special emphasis on the final item. So when it says 3, yea, 4, what's being emphasized? The 4th thing. The 4th thing. That's the emphasis of the list. There's also there's an acrostic poem. Now, a question. What is chapter 31 about? Go ahead, it's okay. The virtuous woman, right?
And King Lemuel's mother giving instructions.
Yes, very good. So why is it an acrostic? By the way, what's an acrostic? Okay, so it goes through the alphabet. It goes from the Hebrew alphabet. Why? Why would it be in an acrostic? Can you think of why God would have put the virtuous woman in an acrostic?
For people to easily remember it?
It's a memory aid. In other words, believe it or not, God expected his people to memorize Proverbs 31. Did you know that? He gave them a mnemonic device so that they would memorize Proverbs 31. By the way, it's not a bad idea. Ladies, to memorize it so that you'll know who she is and what God wants you to be, and men, who God wants you to find. So this is an acrostic poem. The Proverbs in Hebrew wisdom literature, you see there's Job, Psalms, and Proverbs. This is called wisdom literature. The 3 books share wisdom on a common theme, but they wrestle with it in fundamentally different ways. The different viewpoints of Job, Psalm, and Proverbs, I put some things down hoping you can kind of see how Job approaches wisdom, Proverbs approaches wisdom, and Ecclesiastes. Proverbs views life as something you can calculate and predict. For instance, train up a child in the way he should go, and they will not depart from it. It's very predictable. Almost mathematic, formulaic. If you do this, this will follow. Job views life as undecipherable. Does Job know what God's doing in his life or God's allowing in his life? Not until the end. Ecclesiastes views life as pointless without God. What's the key word in Ecclesiastes? Anyone know? What is it? Vanity. Vanity of vanities. All is vanity. It's life under the sun. In fact, Ecclesiastes, you should write it down, even though I'll just tell you it's not going to be on your test. Ecclesiastes is a critique of secularism. Life under the sun. And you know, if you take God out of the picture, life is vanity of vanities, all is vanity. The best picture of vanity, by the way, Hebrew is all pictures. But this is a picture that probably the best picture I found of vanity. It's cotton candy. And oh, cotton candy looks so good. It is so big. And it's pink or it's blue. And you bite into it and you bite your tongue. It melts in your mouth. It's gone. And that's what this world is without God. It looks so good and it gets in your mouth and it's gone. And you bit your tongue and your tongue hurts. That's Ecclesiastes. That's a vanity of vanities. Proverbs teaches that the righteous and wise will be rewarded in this life. In Job, such talk is used against Job by his friends. If you were righteous, God wouldn't treat you this way. In Ecclesiastes, Solomon has all earth's rewards and finds them empty. Proverbs states fact, while Job and Ecclesiastes speculate. Everything is clear in Proverbs, dark in Job, and pointless in Ecclesiastes. All three books of wisdom literature are based on the fear of the Lord. Now, I want you to see the Proverbs in Christ's teaching. The Pharisees sought out the best seats at a banquet. Well, he was referring to a proverb. Proverbs 25:6-7, put not forth thyself in the presence of the king, and stand not in the place of great men. For better it is that it be said unto thee, come up hither, than that thou shouldest be put lower in the presence of the prince whom thine eyes have seen. Jesus is the source of all wisdom. And Jesus is wisdom personified. It shouldn't be surprising he quoted from the book of wisdom. The homes that the wise and foolish man built, the wicked are overthrown and are not, but the house of the righteous shall stand. The fool tore down his barns and built bigger barns. Boast not thyself of tomorrow, for thou knowest not what a day may bring forth. Nicodemus learned that only the Son of Man has ascended up to heaven. Proverbs 30 asks, who's ascended up to heaven? The summary of Jesus' early years in Luke 2:52 echoes Proverbs 3, verse 4. So shalt thou find favor and good understanding in the sight of God and man. Page 3. The Proverbs are found in the Apostles' teaching. Paul, Peter, James, the book of Hebrews, the authorship of the book of Hebrews. Authors of Hebrews, Solomon authored large sections. The wise did. Agur and Lemuel was already mentioned this morning. And I've got kind of a chart there. You can see that chapter 1 through 22, mostly authored by Solomon. Chapter 22, partially to 24 by the wise. And you can see some people compiled it. Chapter 30 by Agur. We know nothing about him. And chapter 31 by Lemuel. We really don't know much about him either. And the dates of the Proverbs. Solomon compiles his Proverbs, and then a couple hundred years later, Hezekiah's men compiled their Proverbs. Now this does not in any way demean inspiration, because God gives the words. God's the one who chooses the words. You see, Proverbs, this is something I hope you'll really latch onto this morning. This will give you kind of motivation, I hope, to tune in. Proverbs is a training manual for the home. At face value, the book of Proverbs, you might think that it's been written and edited to serve a father in training his son and sending him into the world as a mature, wise follower of the Lord, ready to serve his purposes and advance his kingdom. But I want to point out that mama stands alongside dad in instructing, and you see that in Proverbs 1 and Proverbs 6. The example of a mother's instruction in Lemuel's account speaks of a family setting. But throughout the Old Testament, the father is charged with the responsibility of training the children. Guess who it all comes back to? It comes back to dad. If there's no dad in the picture, mom has to teach. Has to teach what dad would normally have to teach. This goes on, and I said the son, probably about 20 years of age, stands on the threshold of full adulthood. The time is at hand when the line must be crossed into responsible adulthood. By the way, why would I say the son is probably around 20? Can you imagine Solomon taking his son if he was 3, saying, now 3-year-old son, look out there. See that harlot out there standing by the corner? Probably he's closer to 20. Probably he's walking him through. Maybe he's an older teenager. But look at page 4. Proverbs is still the ultimate training manual. It may appear to be full of quaint, old-fashioned relics of a bygone era, but when mixed with perseverance, they prove to be gold nuggets glistening with life's realities. I like this little section here from Wurtson. Proverbs is a gutsy book about money, intimacy, and power. It exposes the con game of the drug pusher, the seduction of the prostitute, the sarcasm of the agnostic university professor. It does not blush when talking about the intimacies of marriage or shrink from the evolutionist challenge concerning creation. More importantly, it reveals God's personal philosophy of child rearing. Proverbs shores up the character flaws and obnoxious personality quirks. Do you know anyone that has an obnoxious personality quirk? Yes, we all do. My wife told me, I remember years ago, she said, did you know that you've gotten into a habit when you preach of taking your foot back and going? I said, really? So, the next time you're teaching or preaching, I gotta stop that. My wife was pointing out an obnoxious personality quirk. And once you've noticed them, they grow more obnoxious to you. Then you start counting all the times they say, So, but this book helps you shore up character flaws and obnoxious personality quirks of life and teaches youth how to stand before kings. Proverbs addresses our personal idiosyncrasies. No, sir. No, that's not just the way you are. That needs to change. For instance, that person over there, is he difficult to live with or to employ? How does he manage his money, his time, himself? That young lady, does she talk too much? That cheerful soul, is she unbearable in the early morning? This friend who's always calling, here's some advice for him. And that rather aimless young man. But Proverbs is not just a portrait album or a book of manners. It offers the key to life. Every sample of behavior is held up against one criteria. Is it wise or is it foolish? God is interested in every area of your life, and His wisdom touches on every area of your life. So there are two conflicting worldviews here that are making their appeal to a young son. And he's going to have to choose. I want to point out to you at the outset of this week, sitting through a class on Proverbs and wisdom will not make you wise, but it will make you choose. In other words, you can walk out, let me reserve that for later. I'll come back to that. The two conflicting worldviews are wisdom or folly. They're two paths. Good or evil, two moralities. Life or death, two ends. The danger of making the wrong choice should give urgency to the study of this book. Solomon views Proverbs as a means of transmitting wisdom across 3 generational lines. From David, he speaks of his father, things his father taught him, to Solomon, the one who authored much of the book, and he's speaking to my son. He uses the word my son 20 times in Proverbs. There are 3 generational lines. Do you realize, and this is so important, one of the great goals of my life is that my children will not start over at 0. They should start their lives where their papa ends his life. I should be able to pass the baton, and they should be able to, at a full speed run, reach back. Any of you been in track and field? You're running you've just gotten out of just taken off, and he's coming up, and he yells, stick, and you reach back as you're running, and he puts it in your hand, and you're gone. You're gone. That's how God means for the Proverbs and the wisdom of life to be. So that my children shouldn't have to start over at 0. It should be them taking off and gaining everything I can put into them, and then them growing. So 11 times. A father tries to get his son to hear or to, and I've mispronounced it on purpose, hearken, to hearken. And one time in the book of Proverbs, to obey. In other words, the son who is listening is obeying. Let me say it this way. If you're not listening, you're not obeying. If you're not obeying, you're not listening. Note that the goal of all church discipline, Matthew 18, is to get the offender to hear. If they will not hear you, you go get other people. If they won't hear them, you bring it before the church. If they won't hear the church. In other words, child rearing is so simple. All you want to get is this right here. If you can get their ear, you can get their heart. And if someone's not listening to you, you've lost their heart. It's that simple. All discipline that stops short of gaining the child's listening to obey has failed. A parent has a child's heart when the child has ears to hear. So the rebel, the fool, they've tuned out, haven't they? They've tuned out their authority, and that's because they've tuned in elsewhere. So if my son has tuned me out, it's because he's tuned into someone else. We're all followers to a degree. Ultimately, Proverbs transmits God the Father's wisdom to his sons, his children. Proverbs 3:12, for whom the Lord loveth, he correcteth, even as a father the son in whom he delighteth. On to page number 5. From a father to son perspective, Proverbs teaches about the foolish son, the wise son, the diligent son, the slothful son, etc. That's the book of Proverbs. It's teaching you how a dad teaches his son. What will it be? Proverbs leaves us watching eagerly and praying fervently that the way of wisdom and the way of life will be chosen by the son. It should be no surprise that Proverbs closes by setting before the reader a prophecy that suggests a greater son is yet to come, who will embody the fullness of all wisdom set forth in these pages. Now the next, I cannot take the time to read through, although I wanted you to have it. This is the theology of Proverbs. What would we know about God if all we possessed was the book of Proverbs? What would we know about God, about his creation, about his purposes, about his ways? What contribution does Proverbs make to the whole of biblical theology? This section answers the question whether or not Proverbs is a, quote, secular book. Since it's been stated that a secular business run on Bible principles would do well, even if that business rejected God himself. Well, I have a problem with that. Because this section proves that God's wisdom is not separable from God's person. Proverbs is highly theological. So I've given you an outline that I've gotten, I think, mostly from John Kitchen's book on Proverbs. But you can see the character of God, the attributes, the perfections in length. In short, go to the end of that if you want, on page number 6. In Proverbs, we find God to be the same God presented to us throughout the rest of the book, the rest of the Bible. Now, Proverbs in the 21st century, the ultimate folly is the attempt to live in God's world today without God. That's foolish. Wisdom is not a subjective, speculative approach to life, but a conforming of our will to the unchanging moral order of a personal God. Therefore, Proverbs sets wisdom forth as an all or nothing, black or white category. In other words, if you accept wisdom, you're accepting God. If you reject wisdom, you're rejecting God. It's all or nothing. That's how I believe God presents the book of Proverbs to us. So here's a question. How does a postmodern world, how does a postmodern society view Proverbs? Well, since dogmatic this way or death doctrine is unwelcome in the climate of cultural relativism, created by modern thinking. You ought to talk. You ought to kind of talk. You ought to do this. You ought to do that. That kind of talk finds no welcome among the children of this age. Page 7. Now, this is important. Pragmatism, which is whatever works for you. Whatever. I remember when I was a boy, and I said something. My dad heard me. I said, well, whatever floats your boat. And my dad stopped me and said, I don't want to ever hear that out of you again. Not a bad word. Whatever floats your boat? Why? Dad, I don't understand. And Dad said, because life's not like that. It's not about whatever. And Dad was right. Pragmatism, whatever works for you, is not how God works. And privatization, which is you have your truth, I have my truth. It's the same thing. You can interpret any way you want. You've got your truth, I've got my truth. Pragmatism and privatization are the twin virtues of postmodern thinking. Now, how does Proverbs reach out and connect to our postmodern society? And it does. This is a great book to reach people with. Although Proverbs teaches the absolute opposite of whatever works, the wisdom of God always works best. The Creator's thoughts and ways are not only higher, but also perfect. As for God, His way is perfect. All people desire a successful life. I don't think any of you got up this morning and said, I think I'd just like to fail all my classes today. That would be fun. You see, the inevitable logical breakdown of postmodern thought can be explored and exposed, and then a dialogue, a conversation can be begun regarding Proverbs' worldview and its prescriptions. The same people who are tolerant of everything but God are often openly conversant about the breakdowns in their own family and their own work environment. Their relationships, their children, their finances, their home repairs, all the injustices or inequities of life. Proverbs addresses all of these and opens the door to Bible truth. Explain the truth to someone who's opposed to God like this. Say, I've seen, or I've noticed, or I've found that, and then teach something that you found from Proverbs. And follow up with the book and person you learned it from. Dr. Bob Kendall was excellent at this. He was one of my teachers years ago, and he had a neighbor who was going through an ugly divorce. And at the fence line, met him and began to share with Dr. Kendall about this. And Dr. Kendall said, wow, that's awful. He said, what happens when that happens is you feel this way, and he went through it and just stood there for 5 minutes explaining. At the end, the man said, you have just summarized my whole life. That's exactly where I am right now. How do you know that? Have you been through an ugly divorce too? He said, no. He said, my wife has been happily married for years. How did you know all that? He said, well, actually, because there's a person that told me in the Bible. And he went right into the gospel. Now, you can do that with all the areas of life that Proverbs speaks to. So Proverbs was written for us today. That's my point. It's written for you. The purpose of Proverbs is to impart wisdom to us today. It was written to impart wisdom and skill in living in God's world, in every age, even ours. So the structure of Proverbs, the introduction is chapter 1, verses 1 to 7. That gives the title, the purpose, and the theme. Solomon's discourses, chapters 1 to 9. Solomon's first collection, chapters 10 to 22. The sayings of the wise, 22 to 24. Solomon's second collection, compiled by Hezekiah's men, chapters 25 to 29. And then there's appendices, which includes the words of Agur, the words of Lemuel, the virtuous wife section. Okay, any questions on that? Any questions? Yes?
On page 4, I think the section B.
Okay, let me look here. Page 4,
Number 3.
number 3. Okay. All child training is to get a platform from which to speak to gain a hearing. A hearing. That's right. Anything else? Okay.
Letter I, number 4.
Okay. So, okay, so what I need is I don't have a page that has blanks in it. So if I can look and see right here. Which one? When parents have regained the child's, this is the child's ears. When you've regained the child's ears, the discipline is finished. In other words, the point of discipline is not pain. The point of spanking a child is not, let's see how much pain we can give you now. This is going to be fun. This hurts you so much more than it hurts me. This is not the point of discipline. The point of discipline is when I've got their ears. Now that's hard because when a child knows that the spanking is next, oh, yeah, I'm listening now. Okay, well there's still a consequence, but if you really are listening, it can be minimal. I had one daughter who at the end of getting her spanking, she stood up and she said, "I still not going to obey you." Boy, it stinks to be you. So she got another one. She stood right back up. She's bawling. And she said, after she was done crying, "I still not going to obey you." And so after about 8 rounds, she said, "I'm going to obey you." She was ready to obey. And that's okay. I figured she either had a very insensitive backside or a very insensitive top side. I don't know, I'm not sure. But at any rate, it got through. But you know what? If you don't win at that level, you're going to fight it at this level. So you've got to get their ears. Got to get their ears. By the way, if you don't have their ears at this level, nigh to impossible. But it just means a whole lot more time spent with them, a whole lot more investment spent with them. There's no such thing as gaining a child's heart without spending massive one-on-one time dealing with issues. Their thinking, their heart, what's in their mind. You've got to get into their life. Some of you have parents who have spent a lot of time getting into your heart, spending time talking with you. Sometimes maybe you wish you had that time and you haven't, but you know what to do that's right.